I wrote this book to give a voice to an experience that I believe is underwritten about in the literary world today. This is simply the story of growing up in a blue-collar family and what that means and what that experience is like.
After high school, my father served in the Coast Guard before working as a pressman for a local newspaper. It was an arduous job that subjected employees to caustic chemicals, hazardous fumes, and exhausting manual labor. My dad's friends lost fingers in the blades of the presses, and the huge rolls of paper had been known to fall off the shelves, permanently disabling several employees.
Growing up, my neighborhood was a blue-collar, working-class neighborhood where the kids spent our days, we spent our days riding bikes and playing, and I spent most of my days falling in love with all the girls in the neighborhood, and many of the essays deal with that in here and that idea of innocence.
When I called my neighbor Kevin one afternoon to play, he scolded me. He said I wasn't allowed to say play anymore. He explained when I called him, or especially any of the older girls in the neighborhood, I needed to specifically state my intentions. We would go swimming or watch a movie, but not play. He said the word meant something else now. When I asked what, he said I wasn't old enough to know.
In many ways, this is a coming-of-age story, and there are a lot of experiences throughout here where I was a very naive kid being thrown into a world of experience. And one of those experiences was when I was in college and I had an internship for a company in downtown Cleveland. And my boss told me to go to the office supply store down the street to get some jumbo paper clips. When I got there was a beautiful woman outside who I assumed was an office supply employee, and I was insisting I needed these jumbo paper clips. As it turned out, she was a prostitute. The essays take place over a variety of years, starting with as a very young kid playing with the other kids in the neighborhood, and then it goes on throughout my high school years, college, and then eventually my professional career as a teacher. And it does deal with many of my teaching experiences as well with my students and the things that they've gone through.
The irresponsibility of video game manufacturers is not creating violent scenarios, but claiming their special blend of violence was more forbidding than reality. Simulated horror couldn't compare to the emotions that bled through my student Amber as doctors sewed stitches into her arms. It wasn't fear of the needle. She'd grown immune to the pain. But perhaps she shuddered at the realization that their thread was useless to the cuts that would appear in the upcoming months.
The book deals with a variety of my family members, including obviously my close family, my wife, my father, my mother, cousins, things like that. But it also deals with some other players of my family, including like my aunt at her funeral where the minister for the entire service said the wrong name.
I doubted the minister's sincerity. None of us will ever forget Carol, he said at my great Aunt Dottie's funeral. He'd been saying the wrong name for the entire memorial service held next to Dottie's open grave. He said Carol was a loving mother and aunt. He said she had a fantastic sense of humor. He said she was a valuable member of the spiritual community. Carol sounded like one hell of a lady.
I believe this voice is different than what's out there because all of these stories, as serious as they may be, when I saw suicide, when I saw alcoholism, when I saw these really hard things growing up, there's humor and there's laughter and there's love entwined with all of these stories. And I think that's what really makes this a unique collection, is that one second it's heartbreaking and really, really tough, and this next second you're laughing because of the absurdity of the situation. And I really do believe that this is something that readers will be able to relate to and understand and experience with me.
I'd never loved my father more than that afternoon. When he tucked me in at night, my dad would explain that words failed to express how much he loved me. He held me instead. He'd embrace me so tightly I could hear his heart thudding against my ear. He wouldn't let go because he said when he did, he'd have to use words again. He said words were bound to fall short.
For me, the blue-collar experience was my mom stayed home and took care of me, and my dad worked a lot of really hard, crummy jobs, a lot of hours to take care of us. He worked in a printing press for years, working tons of hours of overtime, filthy work, and then he worked as a janitor for years after that, so that we could experience love, so that we could experience this happiness. And he worked his butt off for us. And the end result was, I believe, this collection of essays. This collection of essays shows that experience of love. It shows that experience of happiness that we experienced throughout life, even though it was tough. Even though these essays show there were some tough times, the bottom line is it was wonderful. And I hope that that comes out clearly in this collection.